You're, what's that? Uh-huh. All right. And if it is yes, if you have been washed in the blood, I hope you rest in that. Rest each moment in the crucified. You know, I was just thinking about that, thinking about what Christ has done for us, how sure it is, how real it is. That's something we can... I had a good steak last night, and I grilled it. I had a little help. But we have friends here that surprised us for Amelia's birthday from Texas. Some of you might have met Mrs. Cindy Roundtree when she was with us when we were candidating. And her and her husband flew all the way out here. Just a nice thing to do. Flew all the way out here and just loving on us. We're so thankful for that, to have them, and be sure to get around and shake their hand. But he helped me grill a steak last night. You know, I've done it before, and I've got a meat thermometer because I'm not, you know, I can't just do it by sight and touch yet. I'm not there. I'm not a pro. And so I've got a meat thermometer, and, you know, to make sure that I take it off 5 degrees cooler than it's supposed to be so it has its rest time. And that was a good steak. You know, I can sink my teeth into a good steak. Well, let me tell you something about Jesus and the cross. It is solid. It is something you can sink your teeth into. It's real. It's something you can rest in and enjoy and find nurture. It's a steak dinner for your soul every day. Really, the gospel is. And so God help us. You know, it'd be a crying shame if I didn't eat steak with Brother Paul when he's around. You know, it'd be a crying shame for Christians who have Jesus in their life to not find that nurture, that nourishment in Him on a regular basis. So don't let that be you. But Matthew chapter 5, if you would. Matthew 5. If you know Jesus Christ, say amen. Amen. And if you said amen, listen for a minute. Listen to me, okay? Jesus has a high expectation for you in your life. He does. It's no different than what God has always expected of humanity. It's very different than what man-made philosophy and religion has come up with, and way better. And here's the deal. You can do it. I said you can do it. You can do what Jesus expects of you. Because of Jesus, you can. And what is that influence, or what is that expectation? I mean, what does He expect of me? And it's to be heaven's influence on planet Earth. The earth and her inhabitants are in decay. Domestically, socially, morally, physically, spiritually, in every way, in every arena of life, earth and her inhabitants are in decay, and they're in darkness. They don't have light. They don't know God. They don't see truth. They don't have what they need for life and eternity. But like salt slows decay or flavors food, and like light guides and comforts those in darkness, if you know Jesus, you are the one who is to slow the decay of this earth and make it taste better. Make it be better. To guide, to be a light, to be a comfort to those in darkness. Heaven's influence is only felt on planet Earth if you touch her inhabitants. Your Father in heaven is only clearly seen by people of earth when His children look like Him. And no one else is called by God to be His influence on earth. It's you. Well, you say, well, how do I be that influence? Well, let Jesus continue to change your life. Let Him change you from what you were to what He wants you to be. From what you did to what He wants you to do. From where your heart was to where He wants it. The life of a disciple is a never-ending open heart surgery. Never ends. And the first two surgeries of Dr. Jesus here in the Sermon on the Mount dealt with your anger and your lust. If you want to act like a citizen of heaven, if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to look like your Father, let Him operate on your anger and your lust. As we have said, there's no such thing as an angry Christian. There's no such thing as a dirty Christian. So, I need to clarify this, though. Just because you get angry doesn't mean you're going to hell, believer. Just because you lust doesn't mean you're going to hell. If you do those things, you're acting like you were when you were going to hell. Citizens of God's kingdom can act like citizens of Satan's. They shouldn't. But they can. And just because you sin, though, it does not mean that you are not saved. However, if you are saved, Jesus expects anger, bye-bye. Lust, infidelity, sayonara. Did I say that right? Marinara, sayonara. I'm terrible with some words. The point is, be a peacemaker. Be pure. And then you can be influential for Jesus. You can't, if you're not going to be a peacemaker, if you're not going to be pure, you can't be influential for Jesus. You can't do it. So what's next? You say, what's surgery slated for today? What's on the schedule for this appointment? Well, let's read about it in Matthew chapter 5, verse 33 through 37. Jesus said to his disciples, "Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black." This was before they had just for men. Verse 37. "But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." Say, what's Jesus talking about? Perhaps you've read this before and he just kept trucking, didn't understand it, move along. Is he talking about swearing? Like cussing? No, but it'd be good if he did. I mean, if you have a mouth like a Savior, you're probably not the best billboard for Jesus. But that's not what he's talking about. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about telling the truth. He's talking about being a man of your word. He's talking about keeping your promises. You say, "I've got it. Let's go home now." Well, touche. But we probably have not gone deep enough into your life yet. We've probably not gone deep enough into your heart yet, deep enough in your soul, because frankly, Christian, that is what counts. That's what counts. If you're going to be influential, you've got to change right there in your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And if that's going to happen, you've got to change here in your heart and in your soul. And if you're going to change here, we've got to park right here. Got to park right here. Does it make sense for a follower of the one who is the way, the truth, the life, to have any drop of dishonesty in him? If our Father cannot lie, should we by choice? So let's spend some time on this morning, and I borrowed a title from my childhood days, "Liar, Liar, Soul on Fire." Liar, liar, soul on fire. Brother Tommy Hawk, will you pray for us this morning before we begin? Amen. I thought about having a politician in today to preach this message. There was a good president, in my opinion, who said, "Trust but verify." Trust but verify. That was Ronald Reagan. Benjamin Franklin said, "Honesty is the best policy." But unfortunately, not everyone operates by that policy, do they? So we expect dishonesty. We expect it. We live in a dishonest world. We're currently house training our children. Try to be as polite as possible. And I am convinced house training little ones is the number one reason you shouldn't get a little dog when you have little ones, because I can't house train more than one at one time. It's just, besides, I'm not the one doing it, it's my wife. Most time. But, you know, our son, Jack, he's getting better at it, and he'll go and he'll do what he needs to do, and he'll come running out. And did you, yeah, okay, did you wash your hands? Yes. Let me smell your hands. And you smell his hands, and it smells like, you know, he's been playing in the dirt all day. You know, he's been playing outside, playing soccer, whatever. So we expect a level of dishonesty, you know. Get back in that bathroom, boy. I'll wash your hands. I don't know, thinking about this made me think about growing up, whenever a preacher would really be getting you to be convicted and convinced that you were a sinner. You know, he'd ask the typical question, if you've ever told a lie before, raise your hand. And, hands would go up, and some people, you're probably I bet one of you here is that person. I'm not raising my hand for nothing, he asked me to, ask the question. But hands would go up, and then he would say, if you're not raising your hand right now, you're lying right now, and you're convicted automatically. We expect people to lie. We're leery of fake news. We're leery of media. And we're leery of scams. Lying is so common and the truth is so uncommon. Daniel Webster said that there is nothing as powerful as truth, but nothing so rare. One preacher said this, listen to this, this is good. Truth is scarce. Everyone is suspect. Business people, salesmen, clerks, lawyers, doctors, advertisers. How many of you actually believe the ads that pop up before a YouTube video? I mean, teachers, reporters, writers, politicians, and even preachers, with a few exceptions. In fact, the whole of our society is a network of fabrication. We shade the truth. We cheat. We exaggerate. We tax dodge. We fail to keep our promises. We flatter for gain. We betray confidence. We make excuses. We tell half-truths, white lies, etc. And it might be tempting for us to be okay with the status quo. A man may convince himself, that's just the way things are, and thus live in white lie land. Now, we get used to lying at Christmas time and birthdays, and I'm not trying to come hard against that. I think I've been guilty of that myself. But you think about white lies, we can get to a point where we convince ourselves my white lie is not as bad as running out on my wife and lying about it. I'm not embezzling money and lying about it. I'm okay, but I just want to ask, are you? Are we? You ever said, and again, I'm not attempting to nuance this thing too far, but I just want to get you to think. Have you ever said, I'm almost there? Someone calls, hey, where are you at? I'm almost there. And really, you're about to make them wait another 30 minutes to show up. Or have you ever called in sick? Yeah. Have you ever said to someone, it's good to see you, but it wasn't? Right? Or you're asked, how are you doing? I'm good, but you're not. I've learned within marriage, and it's a two-way street, but you ask, how you doing? I'm fine. Nope. Or perhaps your wife gets a haircut, and she comes home, and she's all moving, and that was really weird. Brother, how can you? And she's you can tell she's putting it on, and you're like, oh no, what is this? And she finally opens the door for you and says, you like my haircut? And you said, I was just going to say something about that. It's nice. Were you really? We can be really clever with our words, can't we? And we might think, is lying, is dishonesty really that bad? The scribes and the Pharisees, they had a clever system with their words, and they were convinced they were okay. And what did Jesus have to say about it? What did Jesus expect of his disciples? Now, I need to take a sidebar this morning. We need to talk about Matthew's gospel before we get back to this issue of honesty. We've been on the mountain with Jesus, listening to the Sermon on the Mount for about a month now. And you guys have been sitting here good. Proud of you. But sometimes you need to go back and you need to recap. And we need to back up and see the big picture. Spring is on us, right? And spring is blooming. The trees will be in bloom. I'm hoping those dogwoods, or if those are dogwoods out here, will be blooming by Easter Sunday. Man, that would be great. I'm excited about that. The flowers are blooming, and maybe you like that kind of stuff, and you get up extra close. If your allergies aren't acting up too bad that day, you get up extra close to the bloom, and you're examining that flower just to see it. But really, to take it all in, you got to back up to see the many trees and the many flowers, just to behold the beauty of spring. And can I say this, as we study the Gospel of Matthew, we want to see the beauty of Christ in this book. We want to back up and see Him for who He is because He's beautiful and He's wonderful and He's everything refreshing and right for our lives. We just need Him. We got to be careful of becoming too much like the scribes and Pharisees. Produce a list of do's and don'ts and get confusing and cloudy and miss the sign. We want to keep our eyes on the sign, on Jesus, on who He is and what life He has for us. And to do that, it is necessary. As we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, it's necessary to uncover the junk of our hearts. If we're going to know life His way, we got to know what the junk is and get it out of there so we can know life His way. But you start inspecting disease on a plant, you might get a little discouraged with the disease and need to step back and just see the tree, see the beautiful tree God is trying to grow. Are you with me this morning? So let's take a step back for a few minutes and do that. I have a couple questions anyone can answer out loud. Number one, name the book we are studying on Sunday mornings. Wow, very good. You guys are right on it. Okay. Question number two, who wrote Matthew? Wow, you guys. Man, all right. Matthew was a Jewish tax collector, right? First century IRS, turned follower of Jesus. What does gospel mean? Because the book is the gospel according to Matthew, right? So what is gospel? Good news. It is good news. Matthew called Jesus Emmanuel, God with us, right? Jesus' name means Jehovah saves. And so this is the good news that God came here to this planet to save us. It is the greatest news about the greatest person according to an everyday IRS agent who personally experienced Him in his life. It's fantastic. Matthew knew Jesus. He knew His forgiveness. He knew His love. He knew His power, and Matthew wanted others to know Jesus. Listen, if you know Him, you just want others to know Him. If you know Him, you love Him, and if you love Him, His love just spills out of your life onto other people, even if He has a bad rap with them. Have you ever known someone who's had a bad rap with other people, and you decided, well, I'm going to be the person to get to know them, and you got to know them, and you're like, they're not that bad. It's kind of like the Grinch, right? He wasn't that bad, and you get to know them. Well, that was the case with Jesus. Jesus had a bad rap, not because He was Grinchy, but because he had a bad rap with most of the Jews in Matthew's day. He was the king revealed, yet He was the king rejected, and a majority of Israel didn't believe. To them, He was a scam. He was fake news. He was a lie, and so Matthew wrote to the Jews because he cared about them. And he began his gospel in chapter 1, the book about Jesus who is called Christ. And he would say, whether you believe or whether you don't believe Jesus is the Christ, He is. Whether you believe or don't believe Jesus is your King, He is. This gospel is about Him. And here's the evidence. And the evidence demands a verdict. Behold your King. He's legit. He's not a scam, so bow the knee. You can be forgiven. You can be saved. You can be part of His kingdom. Your life can be what God wants it to be, but there was a problem with these people. And the problem was, you may not want Him as your King. Because if you choose Jesus, you have to ignore the status quo. And for them, the status quo in Israel was reject Jesus. Reject Him because your leaders do. The scribes and Pharisees, they were the religious heroes, and their view of Jesus was, nope, rejection. Jesus was rejected by them, so why follow a reject? Jesus was the prince of rejects. Look at His followers, the nobodies, the cheats, the sinners, so I don't want to be one of them. Ooh. So why follow the great reject with the other rejects? And the second reason they might have rejected Him was because their heart did. You see, you may want your sin more than you want Jesus. Jesus' very name means that He shall save His people from their sins. And you might like to be saved from political problems and social challenges and domestic issues. You want God to fix your life, but you may not be so sure about salvation from sin from within. A Jew might say, our religion isn't good enough. Our national heritage isn't good enough. I mean, I'm a good Israeli citizen. I went to synagogue every Saturday. I was raised in a Jewish home. Is that not good enough? So you may not want him as your king because you don't want to hear that you're bad and you don't want your heart to be changed. This is why Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount created such enemies of the religious. Because their whole religious system, the lie they contrived and they lived and they had confidence in, Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, he took a bazooka and boom, blasted it to smithereens. First 12 verses, he gives the Beatitudes. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are, describes the blessed man. And he basically says this, my citizens are the repentant, not the religious. My citizens are the broken, the repentant rejects who are being changed from the inside out. Those are children of God. Those are my citizens, not the pompous, pious religious who have all their ducks in a row. The scribes and Pharisees, you go back and look at verse 20, Jesus said that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. In other words, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you've got to have a way of life that is better than the leaders of the day, that is better than the status quo, because these people were not going to enter, and they were the religious, they were the right with God. Are you getting this? That the two reasons a Jew would reject his king because of his leaders or because he didn't want his heart to change were the same two reasons he would go to hell. The Jew who would reject Jesus to stay status quo would follow the scribes and Pharisees on a death march away from Jesus straight to hell and look religious the whole way there. What was wrong with the religious of the day, you might ask? They were hypocrites. They had a fake righteousness. It was made up. They didn't measure up to God's standard. In the Old Testament, they would create all these little boxes around God's standards and make sure around God's standard in the Old Testament, and make sure they checked them off. Even though they were ignoring what He said, they had all these boxes they would check off and they would feel right with God. It was like, I don't know if you have ever taken a major SAT or ACT exam, and oh man, those things, you start seeing those bubbles, and you're seeing bubbles in your head for the next several weeks. You've got to fill those little bubbles in. No X, no line, just fill it in completely, Stay within the line. That's why our mothers taught us to color within the lines, right there. Fill in the bubble. But it was almost like the scribes and the Pharisees, they created their own curriculum, and they created their own tests so that when the test came, they could fill in the little bubbles and say, I passed. Their religion was good enough for them. They were right with God. They filled in their bubble and they followed their ways. But here's the deal. In order to do that, they totally set aside what God said. Here was God's curriculum. Here was God's doctrine, teaching. This was God's standard for them. And they said, no, we're writing our own test, passing our own test. But they were flunking God's, and they would go straight to hell. And Jesus has been hitting them hard. You see the law against murder, and He applied it to anger in their hearts. You see the law against adultery and applied to lust in their hearts. What's the next area of life where their religious box was checked? Well, the law against lying. Look at verse 33. Again, you have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. In other words, don't swear falsely. Don't lie under oath. Don't commit perjury, but perform, pay up to God your oath. Keep your word. If you make a vow before a God, keep it. If you promise something to another person in God's name, do what you promised you would do. You see, the basic problem of man now is the same as it was then. Man is untrustworthy. So his word needs support. That's why in Hebrews 6, we read it. Hebrews 6:16 says, For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife. You have two guys, and one says, hey, I'm going to do this. The other says, hold on a minute. I'm going to need you to sign some documentation here. I'm going to need you to verify. How am I to know that you're telling the truth? How do I know that you're going to hold up your end of the deal? And so this guy would say, I swear by the living God. He would bring God into it. In other words, I am calling God as my witness that if I don't keep my word, He's going to come after me because I swore by His name. It made it serious. It made it serious. So people would swear by something greater, as Hebrews said. Okay, it was like a crutch. It's like a crutch holding up a weak person. All right, now there were some crutch cover things here, but they were a little old and crusty, so I threw them away. A weak person, right? They're sick. Maybe they're hurt. I've been on crutches plenty. Bad ankles. I was a kid that mom knew I was up in the middle of the night. Crack, 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 you know. And it was Ben, right? But I have been on crutches plenty. You have a weakness or something, you need crutches to support you. Swearing was like a crutch for people with weak character. Because humanity was weak, because humanity was dishonest, because humanity wouldn't keep His word, they would swear by Jehovah God, and that acted like a crutch to support what He had to say. Are you with me? A crutch for weak people. I promise. I swear. You see Abraham doing this. Abraham and Abimelech in Genesis chapter 21. And I'm going to be working a little bit through the Old Testament. If you want to go back and follow, you're welcome to do that. Don't have to. But Abraham and Abimelech in Genesis 21, Abimelech said, "Now swear unto me here, by God, that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son." And Abraham said, "I will swear." Abraham made his servant swear in Genesis chapter 24. When he told him, "Swear by Jehovah God that you will not take a bride for my son Isaac from the daughters of Canaan." And then he made him stick his hand under his thigh and swear. Now, I'm glad I wasn't Abraham's servant. That would be a little uncomfortable. I don't know about this oath thing. All right, so Abraham did that. Other examples, Isaac, Jacob, David, and more. Vows were a good thing for untruthful man. They were a good thing because they encouraged untruthful man to keep his word, to do what he said he would do. And God allowed it, God encouraged it, and as we read moments ago, He even did it Himself. Not that He's a liar, not that He needs His word upheld, but because God meets us on our level. We don't trust each other, and so often we don't trust Him. And so He is willing to do what He allows us to do and swear by His own name, because there's no greater name to swear by His own name. And He made a promise to Abraham, swearing by His own name. In other words, boy, you can trust me. Even God did it. And God had some guidelines on this for Israel. The first one was this: only swear by my name. And this makes sense because, God's the only true and living God. You read in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 13, and it's reiterated in Deuteronomy 10 verse 20. "Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, and serve Him, and shalt swear by His name." You read in Joshua 23, after Israel had entered Canaan, and Joshua is giving them some words before he passes off the scene, and he told them, "Do not swear by the name of any of the gods of Canaan." You read it in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 16. Isaiah said, "He that sweareth in the earth shall swear by the God of truth." So if you're going to swear, you only swear by my name. You only make a promise. You only bank it based upon me. And then the second thing, if you do that, always keep it. Always keep your word. Leviticus 19:12, "You shall not swear by my name falsely." Numbers chapter 30, verse 2, "If a man vow a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeded out of his mouth." This is reiterated again in Deuteronomy 23. The Old Testament basically said this: don't be a liar. Don't be a liar. You can swear to God, like between you and God. You can swear by His name between you and another person. But if you swear to God, you make a vow to God, keep your word. You swear by God's name, you make an oath to another person by His name, keep your word. You bring God's name into it. Watch this, and a light bulb might come on for some. You swear by His name, don't take His name in vain. That's where it is. That's what it means. So this is a reminder of Jesus. Do not lie under oath. Perform what was promised. But there was a problem with who He was talking to in the setting in first century Israel. And the problem wasn't with the law, right? There's no problem with thou shalt not murder, right? There's no problem with thou shalt not commit adultery, right? What was the problem? It was the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes and the Pharisees, they lived in loophole city. They would say, well, I am no murderer, but they excused their anger. They would say, well, I'm no adulterer, but they excused their lust. They would say, I'm no adulterer, but they excused the string of divorces they had for no reason. That was the scribes and Pharisees, and it's the same here. They would say, well, I am not swearing by the Lord falsely. I mean, I know if you swear by God, you can't break your word, so I'm just not going to swear by God, so I'm not guilty of swearing falsely, and that's where they left it. They compartmentalized God's command because they'd say, hey, whoever said you can't swear by heaven? Whoever said you can't swear by earth? I mean, I'm not saying God's name there. I mean, I swear by Jerusalem. I swear by my head. If God's name isn't brought into it, I'm good. I'm in the clear. I'm not guilty. I'm not held accountable to that. Even in Matthew 23, they would get so interesting as this, that if you swear by the temple, you're good. But if you swear by the gold in the temple, oh, you're a debtor. Or if you swear by the altar, I swear by the altar, don't worry about it. All right, you're good. But if you swear by the sacrifice on the altar, you're going to be held accountable for that. So nuanced, so legalistic. And you know what they were doing? Yeah, I'll do that for you. I swear by Jerusalem. Crosses didn't count. That's what they were doing. And so they had this elaborate system of lies where if I needed some wiggle room on my promises, if I need an out, I've got it. And thus all kinds of reckless promises, words, oaths were made, and their word didn't mean anything. And all the while, watch this, all the while, because they weren't swearing falsely in God's name, their boxes were checked and their religious bubbles were filled in. I am right with God. I'm not a murderer. I'm not an adulterer. I'm not a liar. But the truth was they were all of the above. So Jesus said in verse 34, not in my kingdom, disciples. Not in my kingdom. He said, swear not at all. Swearing by God's name was allowable and even commanded at times in the Old Testament. But Jesus said, hey, you have gone too far. You have taken this too far. And hey, Jesus, big deal. I mean, what's the big deal about this? I'm good. I'm leaving God out of it. But Jesus would point out, look at verse 34. Don't swear by heaven. It's God's throne. You swear by heaven, you haven't let God out of it because God's throne is in heaven. Neither by earth. You swear by the earth. You haven't left God out of it because the earth is His footstool. You swear by, let's see, where are we at? Jerusalem. You haven't left God out of it. That's the city of the great King. That is God's city. That is God's place. Even your head. Well, I swear by my head. I have control of my head, don't I? Who made you? Who has power over your head? Who alone ultimately has power to keep your hair from turning loose or turning gray? God does, in the end, ultimately. Who is king? Who has power even over minute things? Who brings every word into account? I want you to listen to this. William Barclay said this. This is really good. Catch it. Here is a great eternal truth. Life cannot be divided into compartments, in some of which God is involved, and in others of which He is not involved. There cannot be one kind of language in the church and another kind of language in the home. There cannot be one kind of standard of conduct in the church and another kind of standard of conduct in the business world. The fact is that God does not need to be invited into certain departments of life and kept out of others. He is everywhere, all through life, and every activity of life. He hears not only the words which are spoken in His name, He hears all words. And there cannot be any such thing as a form of words which evades bringing God into any transaction. We will regard all promises as sacred if we remember that all promises are made in the presence of God. The scribes and Pharisees said, I found a loophole. They were the loophole liars. Jesus said, and God doesn't hear you? You know what's better, disciples? Jesus said, look at verse 37. You say yes, let it mean yes. You say no, let it mean no. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Anything beyond that, you're going to get in trouble. Just say what you mean, even if it's got to be no. Hey, Jesus said it, parents. There's nothing wrong with saying no. It's a healthy thing. It's 50% of the conversation here. If you say yes, mean it. If you say no, mean it. And if you're going to play word games with swearing by God's name, don't swear at all. Be a man of your word. In other words, if you've been living on crutches, well, I swear by my mother's, and I swear by the dog on the Lover Street, and you got all that. I don't know. There's all kinds of strange things people swear by anymore. And I swear by this, and you've got an excuse, you've got a story. If you've got something that's got to hold up your word, and your character's not strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet, Jesus is saying, hey, listen, I am the truth, and if I have saved you, if I have forgiven you, drop the crutches and walk in truth. Put them down. Get rid of them and walk in truth. You don't need those because you are a follower of me. You don't need to hold up your word. You don't need something that's going to make you sound more legitimate. You don't need that if you're following me and you're living in truth and you're living in honesty. You know what this does to the religious? The religious, right? Who's got all their bubbles filled in? It makes them guilty. It condemns them. This condemned the scribes and the Pharisees because they were liars. It condemned the unbelieving Jews because they were liars. They were guilty. They had a clever system to say, well, I don't swear falsely in God's name, but that didn't make them a truth teller. And Jesus reestablished a law, and they were guilty. Who's the law for? 1 Timothy 1:1. Listen to this. The law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and obedient, for liars, for perjured persons. The law confronts every liar and says, no matter how you slice it, you are guilty before Almighty God. The law is for liars. You know what else for liars? The lake of fire. Revelation 21:8. Who goes to the lake of fire? Fearful, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, whoremongers, sorcerers, idolaters. Well, I'm none of them. And all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone. Deceit has no place in the kingdom of heaven. Liars do go to hell. Matthew was telling the Jews, you've rejected Jesus and followed the deceivers, right? The blind leading the blind, the liars, you're following them. Liar, liar, your soul's on fire. Remember Mr. Goodenough, Mr. Good USA citizen who doesn't know Jesus, who maybe, if that's you, maybe you're a professional liar, and you wouldn't call yourself that because you've deceived yourself so long into thinking you're okay, but you're not. You've never been saved. You never responded to Jesus' message. You've never repented, and you have convinced yourself you are good enough to go to heaven. Listen, you're a liar. And you are a heartbeat away from being in hell forever. And you don't have to live that way. You don't have to live with a charade. You don't have to live. You can see for a liar, obviously they have their, on one hand they have their lies, but on the other hand they have more lies. And you've got to live this life that's just fake. It's not real. You're as dishonest and untrustworthy as anybody in the swamp. Forget about draining the swamp. What about your heart? If you don't know Jesus, if you haven't been saved and your life is held up by just this network of intense lies where you lie to your parents and you lie to your spouse and you lie to everybody else, listen, if you don't let go of the crutches and let Jesus heal you and change you and forgive you, you can be forgiven of all this. You can be changed. You can be a truth teller. You can be more honest than Honest Abe himself. You can be that. But it's up to you. You let Christ deal with you in truth. You ask, can liars be saved? Well, who wrote this gospel? A tax collector wrote this gospel. Who thinks that Matthew had a little experience with shading the truth, maybe fudging the numbers a little bit? Who thinks that Matthew had, and he was saved and God changed his life? He can change yours. And if you are a believer, if you're forgiven, if you're saved, listen, you're not going to hell. So thus, your life is to be patterned after Jesus. You are to follow Jesus. And if you will be a disciple, you cannot deal in lies. There is no such thing as a dishonest Christian. Speak truth. Paul said to just some normal people like you and me in the church in Colossae, he said, lie not one to another, seeing you have put off the old man and his deeds. You have gotten rid of the crutches, so don't lie to one another. He said to the church at Ephesus, normal people just like you and me who had believed in Jesus, wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. See, if you're a believer and you're a part of a local church and you lie, or you deceive, or you make people think you're spiritual, or you kind of act like a hypocrite. Maybe you have legitimately been saved, but you want people to think you're something you're really not. You know what you're doing? You're lying to your member. You're lying to a member of your family. You're members one of another. And here's the deal. If you're a believer here, and you are in a spiritual state where you are sickly and you are weak, but you're not willing to admit that, how can you be ministered to by another Christian right where you are? How can you find the help and healing you need? How can you have the therapy that you need if you just won't be honest with yourself and honest with your God and honest with your church and the people that love you the most to say, I need help. I need the therapy. I need the healing. There's all kinds of ways we could apply this to our lives, you know. Think about in your marriage, you know, you made a promise. You got married, you made a promise, sir. You made a promise, ma'am. Are you keeping your word? Sir, when you tell your wife, I'll be home at such and such time, do you get there then? And I know things happen, and I'm with you. I'm shooting the messenger myself. Because the very same things you struggle with, or the very same things I struggle with, I'm a sinner too. But are you a man of your word? Does your wife know that you are going to do what you said you would do? Does your wife know that you are honest with her? What about your children? You make a promise to your kids? Or maybe on the negative side, you say, you do this, I'm going to, but you don't. You lie to them. So now they think dishonesty is not a big deal, but also I can do stuff and get away with it. Shows up everywhere. What about your church? You become a member of a local church, you commit your life to that people. Much like getting married, much like making a formal commitment, if you've committed your life to the people of Emmanuel Baptist Church, that is a very serious thing. It's a very wonderful thing. It's a very serious thing. But let me ask you, are you being honest with that promise? Are you being true to that commitment? I was reminded in studying this past week that near the end of last year, I had gotten to, we're talking about different things, financial things with the church, as a pastor trying to take the oversight well. And I mentioned something that if the general account was, I had a goal to have the general account at the end of the year at a certain level. And if it wasn't there, if the floor of the general account wasn't there, then I personally would make sure it was there. Well, guess what? It wasn't there. And we're not hurting. We're good. But it wasn't there. And guess what? I forgot what I had said. And the Lord reminded me of it this week. And so you know what I had to do this morning? You know what I did this morning? Because I want to be a man of my word, sir. I wrote a check. Because I have no intention to preach one thing here that I am not willing to live. And like David said, who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Who shall be in God's presence? Those that swear to their own hurt, but they don't do it deceitfully and keep their word. When the world looks at you and they see you, do you really want them, believer, Christian? Do you really want them to see a Christian like this? They're not going to trust you. They're certainly not going to lean on you. You wouldn't lean on a cripple, would you? And when your life story has been written, and your body lays in a casket in front of a pulpit just like this, and people are talking about you and it's over. Wouldn't it be great to say, wouldn't it be great for someone to say that there was an honest man? An honest man. If you know Jesus, you can be that. If you don't know Jesus and you are a liar, yet you need to be saved. You need to be forgiven. If you've been forgiven, walk in truth. Walk in truth. Stand with me if you would. Your heads bowed and your eyes closed. As Brother Richard and Miss Evelyn come, lead us in a verse of invitation, I want to invite you, if you don't know Jesus, it's very, very simple. He is God, very God. He is